Hillary Clinton finally met the one man who didn't care about her 30-year political armor, J.D. Vance. She looked the Vice President of the United States in the eye and told him he didn't grow up to serve the public, but to write about it. She had outlasted Kennedy. She survived 30 years of investigations, subpoenas, special counsels, and congressional hearings without losing a single thing that mattered. But she didn't survive 40 minutes with J.D. Vance, not because Vance asked who protected her. Kennedy already asked that. It was because Vance did something no one in 3 decades of Washington warfare had ever done to Hillary Clinton. He put her life right next to his. Chappaqua next to Middletown, $750,000, speaking fees, next to a shoebox holding $412. Foundation galas next to government cheese. In the silence between those two lives, in the raw arithmetic of the distance between them, 40 million Americans heard the answer to a question that never even needed to be spoken. You are about to witness what happens when a woman worth $120 million tells a man raised in a trailer that he doesn't understand public service. And that man opens a folder and simply does the math. I want this committee to understand the credentials of the person invited to question me today, because the American people deserve context. Hillary Rodham Clinton was 8 minutes into an opening statement built on 30 years of practice. Every sentence carried weight. Every clause was designed to distribute that weight across her defense. The Senate Judiciary Committee room, Dirksen Room, 226. The exact room where Kennedy asked who made sure just 3 weeks prior. It was packed. C-SPAN carried it live. Networks split-screened it. The gallery was at capacity since 600 a.m. The last time Clinton sat here, she didn't answer the question. The country came back to see if she would answer this time. She wouldn't, but she didn't know that yet. At minute 9, she turned away from the committee and stared directly at J.D. Vance. Mr. Vice President, I have been in public service for 30 years. I've traveled to 112 countries as Secretary of State. I have negotiated with heads of government on every single continent. I sat in the Situation Room during operations. This committee lacks the clearance to even discuss. And I am here today to be lectured about ethics by a man who was a venture capitalist for Peter Thiel before he suddenly discovered politics. Her voice found that specific register she saved for men she viewed as beneath her. Not the sharp tone of combat, but the flat tone of pure dismissal, which is far worse. You didn't grow up to serve the public, Mr. Vance. You grew up to write about growing up, and then a billionaire made you a senator. So, before you open that folder, and I can see it's very thin, I would ask you to consider whether a man who owes his career to a Silicon Valley billionaire is truly the right person to question a woman who spent 3 decades serving this country. The gallery section behind the Democratic staffers let out a sound, a sharp, practiced exhale from people who waited since the Kennedy hearing for Clinton to strike back. They were getting it now, feeling the satisfaction of a debt finally paid. This woman, who spent 3 decades serving the country, had somehow accumulated an estimated net worth of $120 million. She hadn't driven her own car since 1996. She hadn't carried her own luggage since 1993. She owned 2 homes in Chappaqua, New York, valued at $2.85 million. Her husband pulled in over $100 million in speaking fees since leaving the White House. Their foundation took in over $2 billion from individuals, corporations, and foreign governments. Many of those donors had active business before her State Department. But this wasn't the same Clinton who sat before Kennedy 3 weeks ago. This Clinton had studied the tapes. She watched herself reach for the water glass and miss. She watched her eye muscles twitch. She watched her neck flush red right above the collar line, and she corrected all of it. Her hands were pre-positioned on the table, flat, spread, locked in place before the gavel even dropped. Her jaw was set tight. The water glass was moved 6 inches further from her right hand, far enough that reaching for it required a deliberate, highly visible motion, meaning she simply wouldn't reach for it at all. The armor was obvious because it was brand new. It was the body language of a woman who reviewed the film of her first defeat and showed up to the rematch ready for every specific attack that worked last time. J. D. Vance sat at the far end of the dais. Dark suit, no tie, top button undone. His folder was thin. 5 color-coded tabs sitting on the desk. He hadn't spoken a word during Clinton's opening statement. He took 0 notes. His hands rested on either side of the folder, palms facing down. His face held the look of a man listening not to what is being said, but to what is being revealed by the person saying it. He opened the folder. He pulled out 1 single sheet of paper. "Ma'am, thank you. You described 30 years of public service. Let me describe what 30 years looks like from where I'm from. In 2014, you gave an interview to Diane Sawyer on ABC News. She asked about your finances after leaving the White House. You said, and I am quoting directly, 'We came out of the White House not only dead broke, but in debt.'" He placed the printed quote on the desk. Dead broke. He looked at her. He looked at the committee. He looked at the gallery. He wasn't performing. He was remembering. That memory was visible on his face, not as emotion, but as distance. The vast distance of a man traveling backward in time to a place this room had never seen. "Ma'am, I want to tell you what dead broke actually looks like. Not White House dead broke. Middletown dead broke. Dead broke in Middletown, Ohio, means sitting at the kitchen table at 1,100 p.m. with 2 envelopes in front of you. 1 is the electric bill. 1 is the grocery list. You can only pay 1. You pick the electric bill because it's February and the pipes will freeze. Then you go to the cabinet and count what is left. Canned corn, canned beans, government cheese, the kind that comes in a solid block, the size of a brick. You eat government cheese for dinner, because dinner is the meal that depends on whether the adults in the house are functional, and tonight they are not. My grandmother kept her savings in a shoebox, Nike size 11, my stepfather's old shoes. When she died, I counted the money inside. $412. That was her entire life savings, ma'am. Everything she accumulated in 70 years of living. $412. He looked back at the quote on the desk. Dead broke. 3 years after you claimed you were dead broke, you and your husband owned 2 homes in Chappaqua, New York, with a combined value of $2.85 million. Your husband was pulling in $150,000 per speech. You had a book deal worth $14 million. Ma'am, dead broke doesn't have a speaking agent. Dead broke doesn't have a massive book deal. Dead broke doesn't buy a second house just for the Secret Service to live in next door. Dead broke is a shoebox with $412, a cabinet with government cheese, and a woman who worked her entire life just to leave this world with less money than your husband earns in 9 minutes at a podium. He pulled a second sheet. A committee-prepared analysis featuring 2 lines on a chart. The committee staff prepared a comparison. Your estimated net worth trajectory from 2001, when you left the White House, to 2024, from approximately 0, or dead broke, to an estimated $120 million. Over that exact same period, the median household income in Middletown, Ohio, moved from $38,000 to $41,000. In 23 years, you gained $120 million. Middletown gained $3,000. He set the chart right beside the quote, 2 documents resting on the desk. That is not a comparison, ma'am. That is a diagnosis. Clinton's hands, the pre-positioned hands, the pre-armored hands she locked into place before the hearing because she watched the Kennedy footage and knew what unchoreographed hands could reveal. They moved. The right hand slid over the left, fingers interlocked. Not a clasp, not a prayer. A covering. It was the gesture of a body, desperately seeking a configuration where both hands could hide behind each other. Because every other configuration, flat, spread, reaching, or gripping, had been identified as a vulnerability and corrected out of her playbook. The interlocking was tight. The knuckles went white by a single shade. Not enough for the gallery to notice, but enough for the C-SPAN close-up camera to catch it. Enough for 20 million people watching at home to realize that the woman who armored herself against every weakness Kennedy found was now realizing Vance wasn't attacking those same weaknesses. Vance flipped a tab. "Ma'am, let's talk about speaking fees." He read from the sheet with the brutal precision of a man who memorized the numbers, but reads them anyway, because reading is far more deliberate than reciting. And deliberation was the entire point. Before you became Secretary of State, your husband's standard speaking fee was roughly $150,000. During your tenure as Secretary, from 2009 to 2013, his fees skyrocketed. $500,000 per speech in Russia, $750,000 in China. Organizations that paid your husband to speak also donated heavily to the Clinton Foundation. In total, he earned at least $26 million from entities that had active business before your State Department. He paused, letting it calculate. $750,000 for one speech. 1 hour. In Middletown, the median household income is $40,000. One speech by your husband equals 18 years and 9 months of wages for a family in my hometown. The number hung heavy in the hearing room, the way numbers hang when they are specific enough to be felt as physical weight, not just data. 18 years and 9 months? The room felt it. The gallery felt it. The C-SPAN audience felt it. Because the number wasn't an abstract concept, it was convertible. Every single person watching could divide their own salary into $750,000 and arrive at their own version of that number. And every single version was utterly devastating. Now, let's talk about exactly who was paying. He read rapidly. No commentary between the names. Each name was a separate hammer strike. UBS. After you intervened on their behalf with the IRS, donations to the Clinton Foundation surged from $60,000 to $600,000. Your husband received $1.5 million in speaking fees from UBS, Saudi Arabia, Germany, Australia, the United Arab Emirates. Corporations actively pursuing U.S. government contracts. The Associated Press analyzed your State Department calendar. They found that 85 of the 154 private individuals you met with during your tenure had donated a combined $156 million to the Clinton Foundation. He set the list down. He picked up a second document. The Grassley records from December 2025. Senator Grassley's investigation revealed that when FBI agents attempted to investigate these financial relationships, the foundation, donations, the speaking fees, the State Department overlap, they were blocked. DOJ leadership under the Obama-Biden administration repeatedly interfered. Agents were explicitly told to stand down. Prosecutors were denied support from the Public Integrity Section. An Eastern District of Arkansas prosecutor wrote, and I am quoting directly from the official record, "There appeared to be conflicts of interest for the leadership at Main Justice related to the 2016 Clinton investigations. Then FBI Deputy Director McCabe blocked the Foundation investigative team from accessing critical evidence on the laptop of Anthony Weiner, the husband of your top aide, Huma Abedin. The evidence was actively redirected. The agents were sidelined. Ma'am, I want to make absolutely sure this committee understands what just happened here. Your husband's speaking fees quintupled while you were Secretary of State. 85 of your private meeting partners donated $156 million. UBS donations increased tenfold following your intervention. And when the FBI actually tried to investigate, the very people whose job it is to investigate this exact kind of pattern, they were told to stop. Senator Kennedy called it architecture. I am going to call it something much simpler. In Middletown, when someone pays you after you help them with the government, we don't call it a speaking fee. We don't call it philanthropy. We don't call it a foundation donation. We call it a price. And when the police try to investigate that price, and someone tells the police to stop, we call that something else entirely. He didn't say the word. He didn't have to. The room supplied it for him. Clinton's neck changed color. Not a bright, vivid flush that signals anger or shame. It was the slow, involuntary warming that happens when blood flow rushes to the surface of skin, unprotected by powder or foundation. The makeup on her face, the professional application that survived Kennedy's 40 minutes without a single visible crack, did not extend below her jawline. The neck was exposed, and the neck, unlike the face, cannot be ordered to maintain its color. It reacts to blood pressure, to heart rate, to the autonomic nervous system's raw assessment of a threat, an assessment that runs completely below the level of consciousness and absolutely cannot be overridden by 30 years of hearing room practice. The flush was subtle, a one-shade warming along the left side of her neck, stretching from the collar of her jacket up to the point where the jaw meets the ear. C-SPAN camera 2, positioned right at witness table level and angled upward, captured it perfectly in the unforgiving clarity of high-definition congressional coverage. The flush would be visible on any screen larger than a smartphone. On the phones of the 20 million people watching, it would register as a slight change in the warmth of the image, the exact kind of change that viewers process unconsciously, signaling that something is happening that she desperately does not want you to see. Vance did not acknowledge the flush. He didn't even glance at her neck. He just turned another tab. "Ma'am, I want to talk about 33,000 emails. But I am not going to talk about them the way they have been talked about before. I am not going to discuss classified information, or BleachBit, or the oh shit moment." Senator Kennedy covered that ground, and he covered it exceptionally well. "I am going to talk about a man named Ray. He didn't pull a document this time. He spoke purely from memory, the memory of a real place, not a Washington file. Ray lived in Middletown. He drove a forklift at a warehouse on Brielle Boulevard, the warehouse that used to be an Armco supplier, before Armco packed up and left. On the side, he ran a small lawn mowing service. 3 employees, 2 riding mowers. He did the books himself on a yellow legal pad, the way normal people do books when they can't afford a fancy accountant. When the IRS audited Ray's lawn mowing business, not for fraud, ma'am, but for a simple filing error, Ray panicked. He shredded his financial records. Not classified documents, not top-secret email chains. Basic financial records for a lawn mowing business with 3 employees and 2 riding mowers. Ray was charged with obstruction of a federal investigation. He was convicted. He was sentenced to 14 months in federal prison. His wife visited him every single Saturday. His lawn mowing business shut down. When he got out, the warehouse had already cut his hours. He drives for DoorDash now. Vance paused. He let Ray's story sit heavy in the room, the exact way Ray's story sits in Middletown. Quietly, permanently. The tragic story of a man who destroyed the wrong papers and paid for it with 14 months of his life and his small business. Now, let me tell you about your papers, ma'am. On the 4th of March 2015, the House Select Committee on Benghazi issued a strict subpoena for your emails. Between March 25th and March 31st, 3 weeks later, a technician at Platte River Networks used a program called BleachBit to permanently wipe approximately 33,000 emails from your private server. Those emails included chains containing top-secret information, the absolute highest classification level the United States government assigns. 8 chains were top secret. 36 were secret. The technician later admitted to the FBI that he had an "oh shit" moment when he realized he hadn't deleted them when first instructed to, months before the subpoena. So, he just deleted them after. FBI Director Comey publicly called your handling extremely careless, but he recommended 0 charges. He gave a press conference instead. He looked at her, then at the committee, then back at her. Ray destroyed financial records for a lawn mowing business, and he got 14 months. You destroyed 33,000 emails, some containing top-secret information, 3 weeks after a congressional subpoena. And you got a press conference. Ray's records were about mowing lawns. Your emails were about national security. Ray couldn't afford a decent lawyer. You could afford David Kendall. Ray went to federal prison. You went on a lucrative book tour. He let the parallels sit there. Each one, a pair. Each pair, a perfect mirror. Each mirror reflecting the exact same law applied to 2 wildly different people, producing 2 completely different outcomes. And while we are talking about things that cost other people far more than they cost you, in 2022, your presidential campaign and the DNC paid a $113,000 fine to settle a federal FEC investigation. The investigation found that your campaign completely misreported spending on opposition research. Research that became the notorious Steele dossier. That dossier was actively used by the FBI to obtain FISA surveillance warrants on Carter Page, an American citizen. 11,000,000 That was the petty fine for funding fake research that led directly to federal surveillance of an American citizen, based on allegations that Special Counsel Durham definitively determined your campaign knew were unsubstantiated. Ma'am, $113,000 is 3 years of Ray's salary at the warehouse. Ray got 14 months for shredding lawn mowing records. You got a $113,000 fine for funding a dossier used to spy on an American citizen. And you paid that fine the exact way you pay a parking ticket. And you just moved on. Ma'am, the difference between you and Ray is not the evidence. The evidence against you is vastly more extensive, more documented, and far more public than absolutely anything in Ray's case file. The difference is not the law. The law applies equally to both of you. The difference is the zip code. The room received the line the way a room receives lines that are simple enough to be true and true enough to be simple, with the utter silence of recognition, which is entirely different from the silence of shock. Shock is loud on the inside, recognition is quiet. Recognition is the distinct sound of 40 million people instantly arriving at a conclusion they already held, but had never actually heard, spoken out loud in a Senate hearing room by a vice president who grew up in the exact same zip code as Ray. Clinton's breathing shifted. The highly controlled breathing, the measured, performance-grade respiratory rhythm she meticulously maintained since the hearing started. The breathing she rigorously practiced after the Kennedy hearing. The exact breathing meant to prevent the kind of diaphragmatic irregularity that high-definition cameras can easily detect. It shifted. The intervals between her inhale and exhale shortened by roughly half a second. It wasn't visibly obvious. It wasn't audible. But it was present in the way that sudden changes in breathing are always present. In the slight elevation of her shoulders at the peak of each inhale, the micro-pause at the bottom of each exhale that simply wasn't there 5 minutes prior. Her body was quietly increasing its oxygen supply. The brain made a split-second determination, entirely below the level of consciousness, that the next brutal phase of the hearing would require significantly more resources than her current respiratory rate could provide. The armor was still holding, the breathing beneath it was not. Vance turned the final tab. The entire room felt the shift. Not because Vance moved any differently, he didn't. It was because the folder was almost empty. One tab left. The last page. And the audience, the committee, the gallery, the cameras, all of them had watched 4 relentless stories unfold and finally understood the rhythm. The last tab is always where the real question lives. Vance's voice changed. Not louder, not softer, just closer. It was the voice of a man who is no longer reading from a sterile folder, but speaking straight from a kitchen table. "Ma'am, I want to tell you about a woman named Mrs. Henderson. I am not going to use her first name, because she never liked people using her first name. She said it was far too familiar for strangers, and she considered most people to be strangers. Mrs. Henderson worked in the cafeteria at the Armco steel mill in Middletown, Ohio, for 31 years. She served lunch, meatloaf on Wednesdays, chicken on Fridays. She knew every single steelworker by name. She called them honey, every last one of them, and none of them ever corrected her. Because when Mrs. Henderson called you honey, it meant she had officially decided you were worth feeding, and that was a profound compliment. Mrs. Henderson retired at 74 years old. She retired strictly on Social Security, $847 a month. She had no massive foundation, no lucrative speaking fees, no multi-million-dollar book deal, no luxury homes in Chappaqua. She had a tiny one-bedroom apartment on Corwin Avenue, with a kitchen table where she ate dinner entirely alone. Because her husband passed away in 2009, and her children had to move to Columbus because there were absolutely no jobs left in Middletown. Mrs. Henderson served the public for 31 years, ma'am. She served lunch to the gritty men who built the steel that built this country. And she retired with $847 a month and a simple kitchen table. He locked eyes with Clinton. You served the public for 30 years. You traveled to 112 countries. You negotiated with massive heads of state. You sat in the Situation Room, and you retired with $120 million? He paused. The pause was purely mathematical. He was giving the entire room time to do the brutal arithmetic, not the arithmetic of the numbers, which was painfully obvious, but the arithmetic of the comparison, which was utterly devastating. Your foundation received over $2 billion in global donations from individuals, mega corporations, and foreign governments, many of whom had active business before your State Department. Your husband hauled in over $100 million in massive speaking fees, fees that quintupled during your exact time as Secretary of State, paid by organizations actively seeking favorable treatment from your department. You own sprawling homes in Chappaqua and Washington. Your daughter lives in a $10.5 million luxury apartment in Manhattan. 3 weeks ago, Senator Kennedy asked you, who made sure you were never once held accountable? You didn't answer him. A month before that, you sat for 6 grueling hours of an Epstein deposition and answered, I don't recall, to 34% of the questions asked. And today, I am not going to ask who protected you. I am not going to ask what you happen to recall. I am going to ask something vastly simpler. He looked at her. Then, out at the gallery. Then, right back at her. It was the look of a man who is finally about to say the exact thing he came here to say, and who just spent 40 minutes earning the dead silence that the thing requires. Mrs. Henderson retired with $847 a month. She served meatloaf to steelworkers for 31 hard years. She never traveled to 112 countries. She never sat in a Situation Room. She never ran a billion-dollar foundation. She served the public. The actual, physical, show-up, every single day public. And she retired with absolutely nothing. I grew up eating the exact meals that women like Mrs. Henderson served. Government lunch, free breakfast, canned peaches, and cheap syrup. Those meals literally kept me alive during the dark years my mother couldn't. The women who served those meals in Middletown, in cafeterias, in dirty school kitchens. They were real public servants. They didn't call it that, though. They just called it work. And they retired with Social Security and nothing else. Ma'am, my question is incredibly simple. It is not about the emails. It is not about Epstein. It is not about the foundation. It is strictly about arithmetic. In 30 years of public service, you accumulated $120 million. In 30 years in Middletown, my neighbors accumulated absolutely nothing. Their factories closed down. Their children got hopelessly addicted. Their houses lost all value. Their public servants, the ones who were specifically supposed to represent them, got incredibly rich while they got entirely forgotten. Who were you serving? 6 seconds, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 12 agonizing seconds of pure silence. Clinton's armor. The armor she meticulously built after the Kennedy disaster. The armor she pre-positioned, pre-locked, and pre-calibrated for absolutely every single attack that worked 3 weeks ago, suddenly slammed into a question it was never designed for. Kennedy asked, who made sure? A pointed question about the system, about the massive architecture of protection, about the untouchable machinery of immunity. Her armor was explicitly built for that question. It could easily withstand that question, it could absorb it, and seamlessly redirect it into a rehearsed 3-minute response about partisan witch hunts and 30 years of debunked allegations. Vance's question was not about the system. It was about the vast, undeniable space between two lives. The space between $120 million and $412. The space between Chappaqua and Corwin Avenue. The space between a powerful woman who traveled to 112 countries and a working woman who served meatloaf on Wednesdays for 31 years and retired with $847 a month. The armor was simply not built for arithmetic. Arithmetic has no partisan angle of attack. It has no strict ideology. It has zero partisanship. It is simply two raw numbers placed side by side, and the glaring distance between them. Clinton's eyes slowly closed, not the quick, sharp blink of a woman actively managing composure, not the sudden wince of a woman absorbing a physical blow, a slow, highly deliberate closure. 2 full seconds, approximately 4 times the duration of a normal human blink, the extended blink of a woman whose visual cortex just forcefully requested a moment of total darkness, not to hide, but to recalculate, to rapidly process without any incoming data, the exact way a computer goes dark when it is rebooting, not because it has fatally broken, but because it desperately needs to restart a critical program that is no longer running correctly. When her eyes finally reopened, they were the exact same eyes, same color, same shape, same eyes that stared down 40 cameras in 40 hearings over 30 years. But the expression behind them had fundamentally changed. Not cracked, not entirely broken, receded, the way a tide slowly recedes. Still water, still present, but drastically farther from where it used to be. The combative woman who entered the room heavily leaning into the fight, who blatantly insulted Vance's credentials, challenged his authority, and flawlessly performed the rigid posture of a person who survived everything. That woman had completely retreated to a position much further back, a safe position where the face was still largely composed, but the fragile composition was being maintained from a much greater distance. The exact way a general maintains composure while rapidly withdrawing from a battlefield position that simply can no longer be held. David Kendall's pen was capped. It had been capped since the hearing started. His legal pad was entirely blank. There was absolutely nothing to write down. The brutal question was not legal. It was strictly mathematical. And raw mathematics is not something a high-priced lawyer can defend against. Vance waited 12 seconds. He purposefully did not fill the silence. He understood it. In the exact way people from Middletown inherently understand that absolute silence after a direct question about money is always an answer about money. The filthy rich are silent about their vast wealth, the exact way the deeply guilty are silent about their crimes, not because they have nothing to say, but because absolutely anything they say will sound exactly like what it is. Because, from where I grew up, Vance said, from the cheap kitchen table where I sat as a kid wondering if the electricity was going to stay on, it looks like you were strictly serving yourself. He closed the thin folder. Mrs. Henderson served meatloaf. You served yourself. The massive difference is $120 million. And that $120 million is the exact answer to the question. He looked straight at the chairman. No further questions. Clinton finally responded. Her rehearsed response was exactly 3 minutes and 12 seconds. It predictably mentioned 30 years of public service. It heavily mentioned the Foundation's humanitarian work across 40 countries, clean water initiatives, HIV medication programs, agricultural development. It mentioned that she had been ruthlessly subjected to more investigations than any public figure in American history, and that not a single one resulted in criminal charges. It mentioned 112 countries. It mentioned the Situation Room. It predictably mentioned the hyper-partisan nature of the hearing and the highly suspicious timing of the investigation right before the 2026 midterm elections. Her response was completely comprehensive. The exact way a massive brick wall is comprehensive. It covered absolutely everything and revealed exactly nothing. The wall was exceptionally well built. It had been meticulously built over 30 years. Every single brick was a poll-tested talking point that had been refined and deployed in endless previous hearings. The wall easily survived Benghazi. It survived the massive email investigation. It survived Kennedy. But it did not survive basic arithmetic, because the lengthy response proudly mentioned the Foundation's work in 40 countries, but glaringly omitted the $2 billion in foreign and corporate donations, or the 85 massive donors who scored private meetings with her State Department. It mentioned 30 years of dedicated service, but totally ignored the $120 million those 30 years conveniently generated. It touted HIV medication programs, but completely bypassed the insane UBS speaking fees, the massive Saudi donations, or the $750,000 for one single hour in China. And the audience, the 40 million captivated people who just watched Vance place two raw numbers side by side and let the sheer distance speak. They clearly heard what was purposely not mentioned, far louder than what was. Because deafening absence after arithmetic is always louder than presence. And the glaring absence of $120 million from a 3-minute rehearsed response about noble public service was the single loudest thing in the entire room. Vance did not react at all. He was already packing up his folder, the incredibly thin one, the color-coded one. The strict folder of a man who does not tell tall tales, but simply reads hard numbers. He stood up. He casually buttoned his jacket. He nodded respectfully to the chairman. He did not look at Clinton on his way out. He had already spent 40 minutes staring at her numbers. The numbers did all the heavy lifting. He was just the guy who held the paper. The viral clip that broke the internet first wasn't dead broke, or the price, or the two justice systems. It was the raw math. The full devastating sequence from $120 million all the way through Mrs. Henderson retired with $847 a month right down to "Who were you serving?" followed by 12 agonizing seconds of dead silence and the massive extended blink. 29 pure seconds, shared 34 million times in the first 18 hours alone. The clip required zero commentary. The raw numbers were the commentary. The second viral clip was the zip code. Vance's brutal comparison of Ray's 14 months in federal prison to Clinton's cozy press conference, ending with the fatal hammer drop. The difference is the zip code. This specific clip traveled differently than any other clip in the entire series. It burned fiercely through criminal justice reform communities on the far left, defense attorneys, public defenders, innocence projects, bail reform advocates, and it ripped through hardcore MAGA communities on the populist right simultaneously. For the absolute first time in this entire saga, a single clip was heavily shared with equal rabid enthusiasm by millions of people who fiercely disagreed about absolutely everything. Except the ultimate conclusion. The two-tier justice system undeniably existed. The zip code truly mattered. Ray went to a federal cage. Clinton went on a massive book tour. The left aggressively called it systemic inequality. The right furiously called it the swamp. They were aggressively describing the exact same thing. AOC even shared the zip code clip on X with absolutely no comment. The massive irony was completely visible to everyone, except apparently AOC herself. A hardcore progressive congresswoman openly sharing a conservative vice president's savage attack on a legendary Democratic icon. Why? Because the brutal attack was about class, and class was the one universal language that viciously crossed rigid party lines. 48 hours later, AOC's staff quietly panicked and deleted the post. But millions of screenshots had already traveled to every dark corner of the internet, and those deleted screenshots were, in their own chaotic way, far more powerful than the original post, because they definitively proved the argument had finally reached a critical place where tribal political identity simply could no longer contain it. The massive political consequences were not just reputational. Hillary Clinton's Teflon reputation had already survived 30 years of heavy damage. These consequences were deeply structural. They violently ripped things from her life that absolutely could not be replaced by mere reputation. The Department of Justice, now under Attorney General Kash Patel, officially announced within 72 hours that the formal review of prior DOJ conduct opened right after the Kennedy hearing had been aggressively upgraded to a massive active investigation into shady financial transactions associated with the Clinton Foundation from 2009 to 2013. The crucial distinction was absolutely not semantic. A review merely examines a process. An active investigation aggressively targets criminal conduct. Massive grand jury subpoenas were immediately slammed onto 3 current and former Clinton Foundation financial officers. For the absolute first time in 30 long years, the terrifying legal apparatus of the United States government was not just politely reviewing how Clinton had been investigated, it was aggressively hunting Clinton. The Clinton Foundation's terrified board of directors convened a massive emergency session within 1 week of the explosive hearing. The brutal outcome was a massive public statement officially announcing the sudden, temporary suspension of major international program operations, pending the final resolution of ongoing massive federal inquiries. The cowardly statement was carefully worded PR spin. The brutal reality behind it was not 3 massive institutional mega-donors, a massive technology conglomerate, a massive European sovereign wealth fund, and a massive pharmaceutical group had aggressively communicated in private that they would immediately withdraw all their massive financial commitments if the Foundation dared to continue operations during a massive, active federal investigation. The foundation's panicking CFO quickly retained heavy independent legal counsel, totally separate from the Clinton family's own legal hit squad. In the dark language of federal investigations, when the CFO quickly hires a separate aggressive lawyer, the CFO is aggressively preparing to flip and cooperate. UBS quickly issued a cowardly statement, brief, corporate, and carefully distanced, quietly noting that UBS's lucrative engagement with the Clinton Foundation was strictly conducted by previous terrible leadership and totally does not reflect current amazing corporate governance standards. The spin statement was totally unremarkable in isolation, but in context, directly following Vance's savage reframing of the UBS relationship as a corrupt price, it was the very first massive public acknowledgement by a mega foundation donor that the toxic relationship desperately required immediate, massive distancing. 3 additional massive institutional donors quickly issued extremely similar spin statements within 10 days. The falling dominoes were not overtly dramatic. They were highly corporate. They were deadly quiet. And they were totally irreversible. Bill Clinton's highly lucrative speaking calendar instantly collapsed. Major booking agencies confirmed a massive 91% total decline in heavy speaking requests in the brutal 30 days following the explosive hearing. The primary cause was not a flashy new scandal. It was devastating new language. Vance had brutally reframed absolutely every future speaking gig as a corrupt transaction. Are you paying for a nice speech? Or are you aggressively paying for corrupt access? The brutal question simply could not be unasked. Absolutely every single organization casually considering a massive Bill Clinton booking would now brutally face it. In quiet board meetings, in hostile press inquiries, in the highly particular dead silence of a corporate room where someone finally raised the ugly question that absolutely everyone was secretly thinking, but literally no one was brave enough to actually say. The powerful Senate Judiciary Committee officially voted on a massive bipartisan basis, with 6 terrified Democrats quickly joining the massive Republican majority to aggressively refer the Clinton Foundation straight to the Department of Justice for a massive examination under the lethal RICO statute. The massive Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act was specifically designed to utterly destroy criminal entities that engage in a massive pattern of highly illegal activity. The brutal referral did not outright allege that the massive foundation was a literal criminal enterprise. It aggressively demanded the DOJ actively determine whether the massive pattern of shady donations, corrupt access, massive speaking fees, and highly favorable State Department actions, heavily documented across 2 hearings and 3 decades, officially met the massive statutory threshold for a full RICO investigation. The brutal referral was undeniably the absolute heaviest legal hammer Congress had ever swung at the Clintons in 30 years. The State Department, under aggressive new leadership, formally and brutally revoked Hillary Clinton's residual top-secret security clearance. Former secretaries of state usually retained clearance as a nice professional courtesy, used for casual briefings, cozy advisory roles, and basic continuity of institutional knowledge. The massive revocation aggressively cited the ongoing massive federal inquiries and the devastating findings of the 2016 FBI investigation regarding her gross mishandling of highly classified materials. Clinton's aggressive legal team fiercely challenged the brutal revocation, but the grueling process would easily drag on for 12 to 18 long months. During that massive stretch of time, Hillary Clinton, a woman who had been deeply embedded inside the massive American intelligence community for 30 long years, would be totally on the outside. For a powerful woman whose entire identity was completely inseparable from the massive machinery of power, the brutal revocation was not just a basic legal consequence, it was total exile. Chelsea Clinton's massive publisher very quietly postponed the highly anticipated release of her forthcoming book on female leadership, originally scheduled for summer 2026. A massive book tour, with its flashy press events, its risky Q&A sessions, and its completely inevitable, hostile questions about the massive Foundation investigation, had suddenly become utterly untenable. The cowardly postponement was vaguely described as a minor scheduling adjustment. The adjustment was entirely indefinite. The massive Clinton political dynasty, which had been a totally dominant feature of American life since 1992, was not completely destroyed. It was brutally paused. And in the dirty game of politics, paused aggressively means we are just waiting to see if anyone actually goes to federal prison before we finally decide what happens next. Vance gave absolutely zero post-hearing media interviews. When a desperate reporter from Politico finally reached him via text message, he coldly replied with one single line: "The arithmetic is public." He did not elaborate further. The brutal arithmetic didn't require any elaboration. Back in Middletown, Ohio, Crystal Atkins sat quietly in the break room of the Brighter Days Recovery Center. The television was blaring. The explosive hearing had ended 2 full hours ago. The massive replays were running on an endless loop. Donna was there. Donna was literally always there on major hearing nights now. Crystal had watched all 5 of them. Omar, AOC, Vance, Clinton, Kennedy, AOC again, Kennedy again, and now this massive finale. 5 massive stories, she said. She held up her weathered hand, one finger up for each story. Omar, gross corruption. Massive money going exactly where it absolutely shouldn't. Vance absolutely pulled the receipts. One finger. AOC and Vance. The massive pattern. Take first, loudly pay later, only when aggressively caught. Vance completely traced the money. 2 fingers, Clinton and Kennedy. The rigged system. Who aggressively protected her for 30 years? Kennedy powerfully asked the question the massive system was explicitly built to prevent. 3 fingers, AOC and Kennedy. The total performance. Kennedy brutally held up a massive mirror. Let her angrily argue with herself. 4 fingers. And now, this massive ending. 5 fingers. She looked hard at them, then slowly closed her hand into a tight fist. This one is the absolute simplest. Vance didn't need any folksy Boudreaux stories. He didn't need any thick, quote, folders. He didn't need massive architecture or fancy weather vanes. He just forcefully put 2 completely different lives right next to each other. Her massive life. His hard life. $120 million, $412 in a dirty shoebox, and he forcefully asked exactly who she was actually serving. She paused, stared intensely at the 5 fingers she had just fiercely counted on. She slowly opened her hand again, staring at it the exact way you look at something that heavily represents vastly more than itself. You know exactly what these 5 massive stories really are? They are absolutely not about weak Democrats. They are absolutely not about rich Republicans. They are strictly about the massive distance, the brutal distance between the rich people who actively run things and the broken people who are forced to live with the devastating results. Omar's brutal distance was between stolen federal food money and the starving kids who didn't get to eat. AOC's ridiculous distance was between a $16 tip snatched from a DoorDash driver and a massive $19,000 fancy psychiatrist. Bill Clinton's massive distance is undeniably the absolute biggest. $120 million versus a dirty shoebox. But they are absolutely all the exact same brutal distance. It is the massive distance between the rich elites who loudly talk about poverty and the broken people who actually have to live in it. Donna slowly set down her sandwich. And the broken people who actually live in it are the exact ones intensely watching at home. Crystal nodded heavily. They are the exact ones aggressively counting every penny. Because desperately poor people are extremely good at raw math, we absolutely have to be. We count every single dollar. We know exactly what $16.81 really means. We know exactly what $412 shoved in a shoebox truly means. We know exactly what $847 a month is. And when someone arrogantly tells us they magically earned $120 million in selfless public service, we aggressively do the math, because the brutal math is the only damn thing that doesn't ever lie. She paused heavily. The massive TV replay was loudly running the Mrs. Henderson section. Meatloaf on Wednesdays. My mama would have totally loved Mrs. Henderson. They were the exact same hard woman. Different broken state. Same cheap kitchen. Same $847 a month. Same fierce dignity that absolutely never shows up in any flashy net worth calculation. And when Vance loudly talked about her, when he forcefully said she called them all honey, I could clearly hear, my mama. Same tired voice. Same strong woman. Just a different name. She paused again. Much longer this time. 5 massive stories. 5 vastly different kinds of brutal distance. But every single story aggressively ends the exact same way. Dead silence. Omar totally didn't answer. AOC completely didn't answer. Clinton aggressively didn't answer twice. And the dead silence is always the exact same dead silence. It is the terrified silence of a rich person who has just been asked a brutal question that all their massive money, their massive staff, their fancy lawyers, and their fake talking points simply cannot answer. Because the massive question isn't actually about what they did. The devastating question is about exactly who they viciously forgot. The dead silence was the brutal answer. The $120 million was the real answer. They're the exact same terrifying answer. Donna looked hard at the glowing screen. The TV replay was currently running the 12 agonizing seconds of dead silence. Clinton's massive extended blink. The 2-second total darkness. The cold eyes reopening with something totally receded deep behind them. You actually think anything massive happens this time? Donna quietly asked. With the massive investigation? Crystal slowly considered the heavy question, the exact way she thoughtfully considered absolutely all questions. Slowly. Brutally, honestly. The exact way she considered desperate questions from the broken people in the group room who terrifiedly asked her if they were actually going to make it. The massive grand jury is totally real. The massive RICO referral is absolutely real. The massive foundation is completely frozen. The lucrative speaking calendar is totally empty. The top-secret security clearance is completely gone. She ticked them off one by one. That is aggressively more than 30 long years of massive investigations have ever produced, combined. So, yes, I honestly don't know for sure. But I strongly know this. Vance absolutely didn't ask a fake political question. He brutally asked a massive math question. And raw math questions absolutely have answers. You can loudly, I don't recall a fake political question. You absolutely cannot. I don't recall $120 million. The massive number firmly exists. It's aggressively on paper. And now it is permanently next to $412 in a dirty shoebox and $847 a month from a meager Social Security check. And the brutal distance between those two numbers is the exact kind of devastating distance that massive grand juries completely understand. She thoroughly rinsed her coffee cup. Hot water. Zero soap. Placed it upside down on the drying rack. The exact ritual. The exact same motion every single night. She walked heavily back to the group room, to 8 broken people desperately trying to just stay alive. Deep in Madisonville, Louisiana, Gerald Thibodeau stood quietly right behind the worn counter of the local bait shop. The small television was loudly blaring. The massive hearing replay was aggressively running. A loyal customer, the Tuesday Catfish regular, stood silently at the counter, intently watching. "Completely different one this time," the customer muttered. "Not the loud senator. The vice president. He completely got her." Gerald deeply considered the massive statement. The exact same heavy question the customer had asked right after the explosive Kennedy hearing. Gerald forcefully gave a vastly different answer this time. Kennedy aggressively asked who protected her for 30 long years. Vance brutally asked exactly who she served for 30 long years. He bagged the shiners, counted them strictly by feel. Same powerful woman. Two massive questions, both completely unanswered. He handed over the dripping bag. The customer paid in cash. "Both definitely the answer," Gerald firmly said. The customer quickly left. The shop bell loudly rang. Gerald turned back to the glowing television. Vance was packing up the thin folder. Standing up, casually buttoning his dark jacket, the thin folder. The color-coded tabs. The strict folder of a man who absolutely doesn't tell tall stories. "Boudreaux would have totally loved that exact one," Gerald muttered to the completely empty shop. "Boudreaux always said the absolute best argument is the exact one with hard numbers in it, because cold numbers absolutely don't care whose side you are on." He aggressively clicked off the television, wiped down the messy counter, carefully rearranged the colorful spinners. The quiet shop strongly smelled like cheap bait, old coffee, and the deep bayou. The massive bayou was still out there, completely patient, totally unhurried. Gerald, securely locked up, drove straight home. The exact same dark road he had driven for 27 long years. Past the exact same tired houses, past the exact same worn docks, past the exact same dark water. Somewhere far away, in Chappaqua, a powerful woman who had massively traveled to 112 countries and ruthlessly accumulated $120 million, was currently sitting inside a massive house that cost $1.7 million, being desperately briefed by expensive lawyers whose insane hourly rate vastly exceeded Mrs. Henderson's entire monthly Social Security check, desperately preparing for a massive grand jury subpoena that had been 30 long years in the absolute making. Somewhere in Middletown, a hard man who had painfully found $412 inside a dirty shoebox was currently drinking basic coffee that cost $1.75, intensely remembering exactly what the cheap kitchen table truly felt like when the electricity was right about to be completely shut off. The brutal distance between those two specific somewheres was exactly $120 million, and that $120 million was the absolute devastating answer. If you actually made it this far, you absolutely just watched the single most devastating, simplest political hearing in this entire massive series. Zero Boudreaux stories, zero thick quote folders, zero flashy weather vanes, just two starkly different lives brutally placed right side by side. $120 million versus a pathetic $412. And one massive, devastating question: exactly who were you serving? God bless Mrs. Henderson and her amazing meatloaf on Wednesdays. God bless poor Ray and his riding mowers and his brutal 14 months. God bless the struggling families who sit terrified at cheap kitchen tables at 1,100 p.m., deciding between the damn electric bill and the groceries. God bless the tired grandmothers who keep their tiny life savings hidden in old shoeboxes and leave this hard world with only $412 and a massive legacy that absolutely no billion-dollar foundation can ever match. God bless every single hard-working American who actually served the real public for 30 backbreaking years and quietly retired with absolutely nothing, and who watched today as a hard man from their exact broken town brutally asked the massive question they have been screaming their entire struggling lives. She strictly served herself. He proudly serves them. The massive difference is exactly $120 million, and that $120 million is the absolute, undeniable answer. God bless. Hit that like button right now. Subscribe right now for more brutal stories where raw arithmetic violently beats fake rhetoric, and a dirty shoebox completely beats a massive mansion. Share this massive video with absolutely everyone who has ever worked 30 backbreaking years and retired with absolutely nothing, while some elite politician who falsely called it public service magically retired with $120 million. Sound off in the comments below right now. What was your absolute favorite devastating moment? The dead broke lie? The $750,000 massive speech? Ray and the zip code? Mrs. Henderson's iconic meatloaf? The massive extended blink? Or the 12 agonizing seconds of dead silence after "Who were you serving?" Turn on those notifications immediately, because the massive grand jury has been aggressively convened. The massive foundation is completely frozen. The brutal RICO referral is totally real. The top-secret security clearance is completely gone. The lucrative speaking calendar is entirely empty. And somewhere deep in Middletown, a dirty shoebox holding exactly $412 is sitting quietly in a dark closet. And the hard man who painfully counted the meager money inside it is now the powerful Vice President of the United States. And he absolutely just asked the single most insanely expensive elite woman in American politics, the absolute cheapest, most brutal question in the English language. Who were you truly serving? 12 seconds of dead silence, $120 million. That is absolutely not a political scandal. That is a devastating answer.